Hi everyone, my name is Beck, or Rebecca Pickard, as you may see me pop up in the Druids and Under group. And this evening's Druids and Under discuss everything, is about weeds, or I guess more broadly about weed appreciation. So I'll wait a couple of moments for everyone who can join us live tunes in, and then I will get started. I will say that if there are any particular questions that you have burning from the start, please feel free to type them into the comments, and if I can, I'll sort of address them during the talk. Otherwise, I will get to them afterwards and sort of write any replies in the comment section. Okay, so weeds, what are they? I think, hi Tracy, I think everyone has grown up with the idea of having a nice lawn, especially in suburbia, or about having a particular image of what your garden should be and what should be in it. And often I remember growing up, bindies being the bane of my parents' lawn aspirations, and also the bane of my summers running around barefoot. But that is a really sort of good example of how weeds can often be a little bit annoying for people. Hey Matt. But really, I think weeds are just plants. They're plants that happen, unfortunately, to be growing in the wrong spot though. And that is when we need to try a little bit harder to perhaps appreciate them, and looking at them as plants that are really successful because they have really good evolutionary traits that help them survive, and we can often learn something from that. But often the reason that they have survived is because they are actually really useful to us humans, and also to other animals, like bees, for example. I'll get into that a little bit later, but I guess I just wanted to start off with, looking at weeds sort of beyond, friend or foe, and just really thinking about the fact that weeds are just plants that are in the wrong spot, and going ahead and looking at what we can use them for, and I guess rethinking some of the mentality of, why is it in the wrong spot? Why is that plant any less valuable than the one next to it that you planted on purpose? Some discussions also go around whether plants are introduced, and especially weeds are often introduced as a form of biological control. I'm not going to go into that because I don't know that much about it, but in the same way that introduced animals have a really bad reputation, doesn't mean that they don't deserve to be alive. And it's kind of, humans' fault for introducing them. So not just ploughing them with pesticides, etc. If things are unuseful, then maybe we need to look a bit harder. Do we just not know about them? If they are undesirable, again, why is that? Is it just because it's not the pretty flower that we've planted? So weed appreciation, looking at the uses, both as an edible food or for medicinal purposes, for beauty, and also, what is their place in the world, and for an ecological context. Now there's a lot of discussion and awareness about bees, for example. There are a lot of flowering plants that are technically weeds that are absolutely critical to help have food supplies for bees. That's a really, really easy example to sort of get your head around, and I don't need to go on about that too much. But again, just rethinking, okay, this weed is growing in the middle of my footpath or my driveway. and I really wish it wasn't there, but maybe I can wait for it to finish flowering and then do something with it. And also, what makes something a beautiful flower that you bought from a nursery? Why is that any more beautiful than a daffodil, you know, a dandelion, the other D one, a dandelion that has beautiful bright yellow flowers on it, and then, you know, beautiful seeds that, whilst they will spread, it's really magical. Who hasn't picked one up and blown them and watched all the fairies fly away as a child? Now, uses. The uses of plants are so broad. I'm not going to go on about them because there are so many resources that you can use that are much better qualified than me. What I was planning to talk to you about the uses is the way that I have endeavoured to learn about the plants that are near me. As a starting point, it is really hard to figure out how you can learn about all of these plants. And I started out with just wanting to be able to sit in my backyard and be able to identify what the plants were that I was sitting on or near, and whether they actually had any uses, either medicinally or as a food source. So I started, you know, using visual identification resources, which there are so many online. I'll post a couple in the comments section afterwards, but just starting with, okay, here's my little square mile, and looking at resources, I came across some really cool stuff which I'm going to share with you. So this one is really useful guide, and this guy, he's based in Sydney, and he does lots of workshops which they really kick-started how we can you know, look at the most common cosmopolitan plants that are in cities, and especially in temperate zones like the east coast of Australia. And identification is extremely important because you don't want to eat something that might make you ill. And the idea that plants are natural and wild is something that you also need to be aware of. So a lot of the produce that we buy in supermarkets, there's not a great deal of variation, but wild plants, there's a huge variety in the nutrient levels, and also some of those compounds that can be harmful and accumulate in our systems over time as well. So getting to know the plants around you and understanding the sort of ecosystems that they are a part of. For example, clover is a nitrogen fixing plant. So if it's growing in your paddock or in your grass or in your garden, that will actually give you some signs about the soil composition. And if you're wanting to grow food in it, that will give you a little hint about where you can go from. But again, that's not my expertise. That's just a little bit of something that I've gleaned from this process. So moving straight on to identification sources. Now, weeds are often introduced species. So whilst I am also really interested in Australian plants and in bush foods, and was looking and still looking into learning about all sorts of plant uses, the weeds are often introduced. So they're European, and it wasn't until I went on a trip to the UK a couple of years ago, and again was looking for free food, that I discovered that these sorts of resources, which are from Europe, they have a lot of the weeds that we have growing around and all sorts of uses. So I'm not going to go through too many, but for example, mallow. Mallow is a really common plant species that is around my neighborhood and around near where I work. And it's also a really, really useful plant. But little guidebooks like this that you can take out with you are really great when you're in that identification phase. And get something that has really clear pictures and a clear physical description as well. That's just my little hint. But then also books like even Wildflowers, and again from Britain and Europe. There are so many of these plants that come over from export and from the sort of beginnings of the Australian colonies in their food stocks and with the animals that they brought with them, that they have been quite successful in colonizing and naturalizing in Australia. So using the European resources, there are so many online as well. Again, I'm not going to go into them too much, but finding other people who are interested in learning about weeds in your area is really helpful. So I have a couple of friends. We would go out and focus on a particular plant. So whenever we would go anywhere and we saw it, like, oh, there's fennel, and we would go and, you know, forage and collect the seeds so that we could make teas and all that kind of stuff. But finding people who have similar beliefs is always helpful, of course, so that you can network and share your understanding. And it really does help with that identification process. Again, really important. There are lots of Facebook groups that have like a plant identification focus. So you can share a photo of a plant that you might have a question about, and you know, you will be able to get sort of at least narrowed down. Never trust everything you see on the internet, of course. Do your own research, but it's really helpful and a good place to start looking. Once you have identified and you've gone through that process, then you can start looking more into the uses of your weeds. And I guess when you know what they're useful for, you can then start making more I guess sort of better decisions about what you're going to do with it. If you're going to, you know, leave it in your garden to grow so that you can harvest it, or if you are, you know, going to remove it, what's the best way to do that? And again, I just reiterate, don't eat anything you don't know what it is. I am someone who will try almost anything, and even I will not put something in my mouth that I don't know what it is or have a really good idea. That's saying something. So, and again, going back to the quality of wild species. So where you find these weeds can have a great impact on their nutritious value, if it's edible, and toxicity as well. So for example, plants that you might find by a watercourse, you know, things like plantain and mallow that really like wet feet or a lot of dampness. If they are near a polluted creek or river, you might want to have a think about whether that plant is, you know, a good choice to use or to eat in particular. And in saying that, there are other sort of repercussions about how you can possibly help that, but just focusing on using these plants. If you're foraging and you find, you know, something really interesting next to the road, again, you might want to think about, you know, if there's a lot of pollution from the car exhausts and that kinds of things, or, you know, if it's in a dog park, you might not want to eat that either. So again, just thinking about where you find these things. If you're in a national park, you obviously can't pick, you can't take anything. However, with a lot of the weed sort of unappreciation that happens with regards to the national parks, I don't think they will mind if you pull out some weeds for their regeneration projects. Now, all right, so some of the common ones, Julie, that we can look out for. I'm going to refer to some of the pictures in Diego's book here, because it's really hard to pick weeds from my garden in the dark and for them not to wilt. So some of the main ones that you would come across would be dandelion, which I think most people would be familiar with a dandelion, but there are quite a few plants that are very similar. And again, just finding some of the leaves, looking at the leaf shape, and I can put up some, I guess, clearer pictures afterwards in the comments. So this is a drawing of dandelion. So dandelion is really useful to eat. So the leaves you can eat, you know, in salads and that kind of stuff. It is one that can be quite bitter, and you might need to get used to it. But I have used dandelion to make like a pesto when I had a really nice patch one year. Just lots and lots of leaves came up, made really yummy pesto. The flowers are great to, you know, you can ferment them and make wine if you're that way inclined, but I've also used them just in salads and made them into scones and muffins and that kind of thing. If you have a really old dandelion that has been there for a good long while, when you pull it up, has a really, really long taproot, you can eat the roots as well. You can trim off all the leaves and the stalk. You roast them gently in the oven, and then you can make a tea out of them, which tastes very similar to coffee, which I'm not a fan of because I don't like coffee, so you know. But with these plants as well, they dandelion in particular does have medicinal qualities, which you need to be aware of. And again, so this is where your research comes in. Don't just go around willy-nilly, especially if you do have certain health conditions or if you're on medication. So for example, dandelion is not great for people who have low blood pressure. So don't go around you know, having tons of dandelion if you have low blood pressure. If you have a high blood pressure, it's good though. Some of the others that are very similar to dandelion are flatweed or cat's ear. I don't know if Diego has a picture in here, but it is, I have another one actually that I can show you. So it is really similar, little green leaves. The difference between the dandelion and the cat's ear is that it had the flatweed has little hairs on the top, and they're sort of a little bit tougher. So the younger leaves you can eat, and they're really, I quite like them, even with the little furry bits on it. I don't know what that says about me, but they're quite nice. And they are more sort of prostrate growing, and the flowers have a different shape to them as well. So the flowers, instead of being quite large, like the dandelion flowers, they're more flat. Now, another one that can be quite similar to the dandelion is a sow thistle or a milk thistle, which I do have a picture of here. And again, like, it's quite tall, has longs, it has a sort of serrated leaves, but it's much taller, and the stalk grows up like much taller, with the leaves growing up tall as well. And again, that is really tasty to use just as a green veggie in salads and things like that. You can cook it and use it like spinach. And I think there is a story that I heard that the milky sap that comes from the sow thistle used to be used as a gum, like a chewing gum or something like that, for our New Zealand friends. Never tried it though, so and again, I think sow thistle also has medicinal qualities for women in particular when they're menstruating, and also for, I think, diarrhea, which it's handy to know. one of my favorite plants is a farmer's friend. Now, it goes by lots of name, cobbler's peg, and plenty of others that I can't recall right now. And those plants that if they're in the paddock and you're walking through, they will stick to your clothes. The seed heads are really sort of spiny and black, and they will stick to your clothes, stick into your socks, and they're really irritating. But the medicine of that plant in particular is really useful for, you know, using teas to help with like urinary tract infections, and also to make a wash for the eyes. If you have like congestion or conjunctivitis, that kind of thing in your eyes, you can rinse your eyes with the tea. But besides the medicinal uses, you can eat the young shoots. The old ones, they sort of get a bit tough, but the young ones, they're really tasty, and the flowers as well. I think it's more of an anti-inflammatory kind of plant. Another one is fennel, which I sort of briefly mentioned before, but fennel, wild fennel is really lovely. It's a lovely plant. It's really goes really tall usually, and is quite bushy with those telltale leaves that are really fine and sort of really full and bright green. And they grow quite tall. Like, I've stood in stands of wild fennel and it's been taller than me, and I'm 5'9", so that's a good effort. So you can eat the leaves, and they have that really tasty aniseed freshness. It's not quite as strong as licorice, which I enjoy, but also the seeds, once they have you know, gone to seed, when you can eat them fresh. You just have a couple and you sort of give them a little chew, and they sort of burst. The flavor just bursts in your mouth. It's absolutely fabulous. But you can keep them and store them, and you can use them to make tea. Again, very medicinal. And you know, you can eat it too. It's great. So fennel is really good for like stomach complaints. Fennel tea is really easy on our digestive system, and has often been used in colic water for babies too. I think that you do need to be careful if you're pregnant though, because it can help bring on labor. Again, I don't know that, but best to check these things out. Now, Fleabane is another really common one near me. Fleabane is really tall, and it has sort of these bright green serrated leaves with a light sort of fuzzy fur on them. And they are exactly as their name suggests, which is refreshing. When the leaves are burned or ground up and powdered, they do repel fleas and other sorts of insects. So they're really handy if you have pets, and you know, you sort of scatter it over their bedding. One year we had a really bad flea swarm in my grass, and I said the dog's bed that was outside, I basically laid all these Fleabane underneath it. It was great. It worked quite well. And again, I also believe that there are some ritual uses for Fleabane, which I don't know a whole lot about, so I won't go into it too much. But a lot of these plants that we call weeds actually do have old world uses as well. So getting into your own research can really sort of help you, once you find out what's near you, you know, how you can use them, what can you do with them. There's one more plant that I will sort of speak about because it is a favorite, and it's plantain. Plantain is great because with some of the Aboriginal sort of plant workshops that I've attended, plantain has actually been included and talked about, and there is some speculation about whether plantain or some sort of types of plantain were native to Australia as well. And one of the people that did this, talk that I attended actually called it the Band-Aid plant, which I don't know what does that mean? But plantain, whilst you can eat it, and if you're familiar with psyllium husks are actually the seed heads from the plantain plant. But the leaves, if you have a cut or a sting or a bite on your skin, if you get a plantain leaf, crush it up. I usually sort of put it in my mouth, give it a bit of a chew, spit it back out because I'm lovely like that, and put it on your skin, and it will help to heal the wound quicker. It has a sort of mild antiseptic, and it also has a bit of an anti-inflammatory action as well. So if you get a sting from a bull ant or something like that, if you put it on, it will reduce the swelling a lot quicker, and it's a bush medicine as well. Okay, so looking at some more of the resources, I guess. Now, there are so many around, but I'm just going to refer to another book which is completely different. So this is one of my many herbal books that I have tried to learn about, what plants can do. And this book, if you haven't read it, goes into the the magical uses of different plants. So, excuse me, I've lost my page. All right. So I'm just going to go through this page. It's not weeds, but you can see how some of, so down the bottom, tansy, it has magical uses. It has ideas about how you can use it in your magic as well. And because lots of the weeds that we have in Australia are introduced, they have old world magic about them. I think I am getting close. Me too, Sandra. It's a great book. I think we are getting close to time, or a bit over, so I will leave it there. If there are any other questions or any specific sort of plant references or questions that you have, please do post them in the comments and I'll get to them afterwards. But thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you get as excited about weeds as I am. Have a good night, guys. Bye.